welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping headfirst into the sources you shared with us, and today we're tackling the E-2 investor visa in the U.S.
Right.
And our mission, well, it isn't just about figuring out how to get the visa approved. We really want to unpack what these materials tell us about building a successful business once you actually get here.
That's really the crucial part, isn't it? The sources you've brought us, they push beyond just the visa checklist. They really dive into the practical side of things. We're looking at questions like, how much money do you really need to invest? What kind of business actually has the best shot, not just for approval, but for, thriving?
And maybe most importantly, what's the game plan after the visa comes through?
Exactly. What happens next?
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. First off, just the basics for anyone maybe less familiar. What exactly is this E-2 visa?
Well, fundamentally, it's a non-immigrant visa. That's key. It's not a direct path to a green card. But it lets people from certain countries that have a specific commerce and navigation treaty with the U.S., come here and run a business based on a pretty significant investment they make.
And those treaty countries, that's a specific list, right? Your sources mentioned Mexico and Spain as examples.
That's right. You have to be a national of one of those specific countries. And beyond that, the sources really highlight three core things the government looks at.
Okay, what are they?
One, you've got to make a substantial investment. Two, the business itself, it has to be real, operational, and this is important, non-marginal.
Non-marginal.
Yeah.
You mean it has to do more than just barely support the investor and their family? It needs to be bigger than that.
Exactly. It needs the capacity to actually generate significant income, contribute to the U.S. economy, maybe create some jobs down the line.
Got it.
And the third thing is that you, the investor, have to be actively involved, developing it, directing it. You can't just be like a passive shareholder collecting checks.
Okay, so substantial money in, a real business that works, and you're the one actually running the show. Let's dive into that first part then, the substantial investment, because, wow, the sources you sent really challenge what I think a lot of people assume here.
They absolutely do. So many people think there's this hard, fixed minimum dollar amount you need for an E-2. You hear figures like, what, $100,000, maybe $200,000 thrown around all the time.
Yeah, those numbers come up a lot.
But the sources are super clear on this. There is no set minimum investment amount written into the actual law.
Wait, really? So that $100 or $200K number, is that just what lawyers prefer or maybe what some officers are used to seeing, not an actual rule?
Pretty much. The law itself is, well, vaguer. It just says the investment has to be proportional to the business.
Proportional. Okay, what does that mean in practice?
For a new company, it generally means investing enough money to get that specific business fully up and running, ready to actually do what it plans to do.
And your sources gave some, frankly, eye-opening examples of what enough can actually look like.
Yeah, they really show the flexibility. One specific case mentioned was a recent E-2 approval. Investment was only around $50,000.
$50,000. Wow. For what kind of business?
It was for installing mechanical equipment on boats. And the attorney handling it specifically said, they see success with lower amounts than many other firms might even take on.
$50,000 for an E-2 visa. That feels totally different from the usual story you hear.
It really does. And another source shared a success story with a services company. It got approved with an investment closer to like $23,000. That one was processed in Mexico.
$23,000, too.
So yeah, while you might hear those typical ranges, maybe $50K to $100 or around $100 for more traditional businesses, these examples you found really show it depends entirely on the business's needs. It's not some magic number.
Okay, so if it's not just about hitting a specific dollar figure, what's the government really trying to assess when they look at the investment? What's the principle?
They want to see you have skin in the game. That's the phrase they use.
Right.
The amount helps show your commitment. It needs to be enough capital that, well, if the business were to fail, you'd stand to lose a significant chunk of it, maybe all of it.
Ah, so that's the at-risk idea we hear about. The money can't just be sitting there promised. It has to be actively committed to things the business needs.
Precisely. It has to be spent or, irrevocably committed to those startup costs. Things like buying inventory, equipment, maybe securing a lease, initial advertising costs.
What about things like lawyer fees? Do those count?
The sources mention that legal fees and other professional fees can technically count towards the investment, but they also caution against those making up a really big percentage of the total investment you present. It can raise flags if it looks like most of the money went to fees instead of, the actual business operations.
Okay, that makes sense. So the key takeaway here from these sources seems to be Forget the idea of a hard minimum. Focus instead on showing you've invested the specific amount your particular business needs to get going, and that the money is genuinely committed, genuinely at risk.
That really seems to be the core message from the sources on the investment amount, yeah.
All right, so once the investment piece is clear, proportional, at risk, the next huge thing is choosing the business itself.
Oh.
What did the sources say about picking the right kind of venture for E2 success?
Oh, this is absolutely critical. Maybe even more critical than the exact dollar amount, actually, based on what the sources were saying.
Really?
Yeah. They stressed that the business choice, ideally, it should line up with your background, your experience, your skills, maybe even your interests. Or if it doesn't, you need to be ready to learn incredibly fast or bring in experts who do have that know-how.
Okay, that sounds like solid business advice generally.
Yeah.
What kinds of businesses did the sources point to as working well for E2? Were there common themes?
There were, definitely. We saw a noticeable cluster of service-based businesses mentioned quite a bit.
Like what?
Things like cleaning or janitorial services, home healthcare agencies, maybe auto repair shops, logistics and freight services, wellness businesses too, like spas or fitness centers.
Okay, I can see how those might often have lower startup costs compared to, say, manufacturing something.
Right. Then there's a whole group around food and beverage or retail. Lots of examples there. Different kinds of restaurants, fast casual, coffee shops, catering, but also traditional retail stores, convenience stores, mini markets, ice cream places, even food stands.
Pretty broad range.
Hmm.
Did they mention online businesses too?
They did, yeah. E-commerce came up selling on platforms, like Amazon, Etsy, eBay, or maybe running your own Shopify store. That offers a different kind of pathway. And they also mentioned some more unique ones, like that boat equipment installation business from the $50K example. And real estate investment was mentioned too.
Yeah.
Though the sources were careful to note that real estate needs significantly more capital upfront for down payments, and you need a very specific kind of company structure. Ideally, they said, you'd need enough capital for maybe 2 properties or at least 1 under contract.
Wow, that's quite a diverse list then. So why do these types of businesses seem to pop up so often in successful E2 cases, according to the sources? What makes them good candidates?
Well, the sources point to a few common threads. Many of them are seen as providing essential services.
Things people need regardless of the economy.
Exactly. That makes them a bit more recession resistant, food, cleaning, transportation. Also, they often have pretty clear paths to scalability.
Meaning you can start small and grow.
Right. You can start small, maybe add locations later, expand your service area, perhaps even develop it into a franchise model yourself down the road.
That scalability sounds really important for showing that non-marginal potential we talked about earlier.
It absolutely is. The ability to grow and, crucially, to hire employees, that's vital. Remember, the E2 is partly about contributing to the U.S. economy, and creating jobs is a huge part of that contribution. These types of businesses are also generally seen as manageable. The investor can oversee things, but there's room to hire staff for the day-to-day operations. You're not expected to be the only person working there forever.
Right.
And some are naturally community-based, which can sometimes help them gain traction and build customer loyalty a bit faster.
What about franchises? Those came up too, right?
Yeah.
As a potentially good route.
Yes, definitely. Buying into a franchise offers a proven business model, right? You get an established brand name and usually a lot of built-in support and training.
So less guesswork involved.
Exactly. For an investor who maybe doesn't have a ton of direct entrepreneurial experience, a franchise can really de-risk the whole venture. It gives you a clear playbook, which also looks good to visa officers who are assessing, is this business actually viable?
Okay, so the message seems to be, choose your business strategically. Align it with what you know or plan to learn fast, and maybe lean towards these models that the sources show are viable, manageable, and have that potential for growth and hiring. So what's the big overarching theme the sources kept coming back to regarding overall success?
Preparation. Simple as that. Preparation before you even think about applying, and just as critically, preparation for what comes after you get the visa. The sources were really emphatic about this. Preparation is absolutely everything.
Okay, let's break that down.
Yeah.
What does that intense preparation before you submit the application actually involve? based on these sources?
It's pretty detailed work. First and foremost, you need a really comprehensive business plan.
Right.
And the sources stress this isn't just some document to tick a box for the government. It's your actual roadmap, financially, operationally. It needs detailed projections, clear hiring timelines, a solid marketing strategy. You can't just wing it with a vague idea.
So you need a real plan for actually running the business, not just for getting the visa.
Precisely. Then you need to clearly show your investment is truly at risk. Like we discussed, the funds have to be committed, not just sitting there available.
Okay.
You also need to get the basic legal structure sorted out. That means forming your company, usually an LLC, getting your EIN, which is the business tax ID, and crucially, opening a U.S. business bank account and actually putting the investment funds into that account.
Taking those concrete steps makes it much more real, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What about having a place to operate from?
Yes. Definitely. Showing you have a location. That might mean having a signed commercial lease or maybe at least a strong letter of intent to lease a specific space. It shows the business isn't just an idea, it has a physical presence or is actively setting one up.
Yeah, the sources were very clear that the E-2 visa is not for speculative ideas. You have to demonstrate you've already taken significant concrete actions.
That's the absolute critical point they made. You're applying as someone who is already an operational or very nearly operational business owner, someone who has already made tangible investments, not as someone who just plans to start a business if maybe they get the visa approved. You have to show you are a business owner right now.
Okay, so that's the heavy lifting before you apply. What about preparation after the visa is approved? What did the sources highlight as being key for that long-term success on the E-2?
Well, once you get the approval, the sources really emphasize treating this whole thing like a real serious business from day one.
No coasting allowed.
No coasting. That means actively working it, making the decisions, and crucially reinvesting profits back into the business's growth. That could mean hiring more staff, boosting your advertising, expanding your services, or maybe even looking at new locations.
And hiring early, creating those jobs, that's expected, right? Not just an optional extra.
Oh, it's absolutely essential. The whole point of the E-2, from the government's perspective, is to stimulate the U.S. economy. Job creation is a key metric they look at, especially for renewals down the road.
Okay.
And alongside that, maintaining clean, meticulous financial records. Documenting everything. This isn't just for taxes, it's vital for future visa renewals, or if you ever decide to explore other immigration options later on.
It really sounds like the basic principles of just good business management are sort of amplified here.
Yeah.
Because your very ability to stay in the country is tied directly to the health of the business.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
And the sources kind of contrasted this diligent approach with the common reasons they saw E-2 businesses fail.
More no.
Things like, well, inadequate preparation up front, underestimating the real costs involved in starting and running the business day to day. Sometimes choosing a business type they just didn't understand or weren't actually passionate about, maybe having no real marketing plan, or just running into basic cash flow problems.
Yeah.
Often, the biggest mistake highlighted was people thinking that getting the visa approved was the finish line.
When really it's just the starting gun.
Exactly. It's just the start of the real entrepreneurial race.
So preparation proves your commitment up front, and then that continuous diligent work keeps the business healthy and, by extension, supports your ongoing status. Okay, let's just briefly touch on any specifics the sources mentioned about the application process itself.
Sure. I mean, the core of the application is always showing that substantial at-risk investment, proving your ability to actively manage it, and demonstrating the business's viability. But the sources did note some strategic elements.
Like what?
Like thinking carefully about where you file your case. For instance, different U.S. consulates abroad might have slightly different processing times or maybe procedural nuances. They gave the example of, say, Mexico City versus Juarez potentially being different. And apparently, there's sometimes a possibility of getting cases transferred between posts.
Well, that's interesting. So even the filing location could be part of your overall strategy. What about the interview itself?
Well, one source suggested that while you definitely need to prepare for the interview, if your overall case file, the application, the business plan, the documentation is really strong and well put together, the actual interview might end up being relatively straightforward, maybe just focusing on confirming key details.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
A strong case speaks for itself.
Yeah.
And there's that key distinction that often confuses people. The difference between the E-2 visa and your E-2 status.
Yes, this is a super common point of confusion, and the sources touched on it. The visa itself, that's basically your permission slip to enter the U.S.
Okay.
And depending on your treaty country, it can be valid for multiple years. The sources mentioned Spain, for example, often gets a 5-year visa validity.
Right.
But your status, that's different. That's how long you're actually allowed to remain in the U.S. each time you enter. And that's typically granted in increments of 2 years.
So wait, you could have a visa sticker in your passport that's good for 5 years, letting you travel in and out, but every time you arrive at the U.S. border, the officer might stamp your passport, allowing you to stay for only 2 years from that date.
That's generally how it works, yes.
Yeah.
So to stay longer than that initial 2-year period, you'd either need to apply for an extension of status while you're still inside the U.S., or you could leave the country and then re-enter using your still valid E-2 visa and potentially get a fresh 2-year admission period upon re-entry.
Okay, that's a really important distinction. Needs careful tracking.
Absolutely. And again, the sources just kept circling back to this fundamental point. Getting the initial visa approved is, yes, it's a huge hurdle, a massive milestone. But the long-term success, your continued ability to actually live and work in the U.S. under that E-2, that depends entirely on building and running a genuinely thriving, compliant business after you get here.
This has been a really, really insightful deep dive. I feel like we've moved way beyond the standard E2 FAQs here, really getting into the practicalities, the mindset needed for success, all based on these sources you provided us.
Yeah, it really highlights that the government isn't just looking for someone to park some money here. They're looking for a genuine business owner, someone committed to actually building something that contributes.
So thinking about everything we've covered,
Mm.
the flexibility and the investment amount, but the strict need for it to be proportional and at risk, the huge emphasis on picking a viable, manageable business, and then the whole non-immigrant nature of the visa itself with those limited status periods.
Mm.
It leads to a thought I want to leave you, the listener, with.
Mm.
Given that the E-2 visa is specifically not an immigrant visa, and it operates on these, say, 5-year visa cycles and 2-year status periods, how does that structure maybe inherently influence the type of business someone should choose? And maybe their long-term strategy? Does it push towards certain kinds of decisions compared to someone who's on, say, a green card path right from the beginning?
That's a really interesting question. It certainly puts a different kind of pressure, maybe a different focus on those early years of the business, doesn't it?
It really does. Okay, so just to quickly wrap up the key takeaways we distilled from your sources today. First, forget the myth about a fixed minimum investment. It's all about being proportional to your business and showing the money is truly at risk.
Right. Focus on the business needs.
Second, strategic business choice is absolutely paramount. Look for something viable, manageable, and with real potential for growth and hiring, ideally aligning with your skills.
Choose wisely.
And finally, that rigorous preparation. It isn't just a hurdle to get the visa. It's the foundation for the ongoing work of building a truly sustainable business that can actually support your status long-term.
It's really less about just checking boxes for the visa officers and much more about laying the groundwork for a real, operating, successful enterprise.
Well, thank you so much for bringing these sources to us for this deep dive. It's definitely painted a much clearer and I think more realistic picture of the whole E2 journey.